If only you were a son, this embarrassment wouldn't have happened. My father's voice slammed against the walls of our living room, shaking the DNA envelope clenched in his fist. His face was red with fury. His words cut deeper than any test result ever could. My name is Janelle, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who raised you, only to realize none of them had ever truly accepted you? My mother didn't defend me. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair, and smirked. I always knew, she said coolly. She doesn't look like us. She doesn't feel like us. I mean, look at her. Quiet. Awkward. Too soft to belong in this family. The room buzzed with shock. My brothers looked at me like I was a ghost. Like the idea of me being different suddenly explained every slight, every exclusion, every time I was treated like a stranger in my own house. And still, I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why a 23andMe kit suddenly gave them permission to unravel my entire life. I stood there, silent. Not because I was broken, but because I was listening. I was watching the way my father clutched the paper like it was some holy truth. The way my mother's eyes darted, not at me, but at her purse, resting just beneath the table. That's when something shifted inside me. A hunch, a flicker, a thread of truth they weren't telling. So while they kept talking, debating whose shame I stepped back, knelt down, and unzipped the side pocket of her bag, and pulled out papers. Not folded, not hidden. Just waiting. What I found wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. Birth records. Dates that didn't add up. A sealed hospital bill in my father's name, dated 3 months before I was even born. The moment he saw what I was holding, my father's voice caught in his throat. He froze. The red drained from his face. His grip on the DNA envelope loosened. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk in through the front door, and it was me. "What is that?" he asked, but his voice was barely a whisper now. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My mother's eyes widened. Her smirk vanished. Because she knew what I'd found. And I knew she never expected me to find it. For the first time in that house, I wasn't the quiet girl. I wasn't the soft one. I wasn't the mistake. I was the one holding their truth. And I wasn't about to let it go. They had used that test to erase me. But what they didn't know was, I had the kind of truth that couldn't be swabbed out of a cheek. I didn't storm out. I walked out slowly, with the envelope in one hand and their secrets in the other. That was the last time they saw me as weak. Because the next time they heard my name, it would be in a courtroom. And this time, I wouldn't be the one on trial. They always treated me like I was a stranger wearing their last name. Growing up, I didn't know what love from my parents felt like, only tolerance. I learned early that silence was safer than questions, that speaking up got you labeled too sensitive, while obedience earned you nothing. I watched my brothers get celebrated for the bare minimum, passing a math test, washing their own dishes, surviving football tryouts. Meanwhile, I brought home straight A's, won regional writing contests, kept to myself, and still got told I was taking up too much space. My mother rarely touched me. No hugs. No softness. Only criticism. She'd tell guests, "Janelle's a little odd. She's quiet. Just different." As if I wasn't right in the room. And my father? He treated me like a missed opportunity. Like every time he looked at me, all he saw was a failed dream, a daughter instead of the son he'd clearly wanted. By the time I was 12, I knew the rules of the house. Never correct my father. Never speak when mom's friends were over. Don't expect anyone to clap for your achievements. Still, I tried. God, I tried. I made flashcards for my brother's exams. Cooked dinner when mom needed a break. Did the laundry, cleaned the house, volunteered for everything. I thought that if I worked hard enough, maybe one day they'd say, "We're proud of you." But that day never came. The few times I confronted them about their favoritism, their silence when I needed them, I got called dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. It always ended the same way, my father yelling, my mother rolling her eyes, and me retreating to my room, swallowing tears like pills. I never truly understood why they treated me like that. until the DNA envelope, until that smirk on my mother's face, until those hospital records that told a story no one had ever dared to speak. They'd always known. I wasn't just the disappointment. I was the reminder of a mistake, of something messy, of something they'd hidden, and I was the living, breathing proof. And yet they kept me. Not out of love, out of image, out of obligation, out of fear that someone would start asking questions. But the irony? I never wanted to expose them. I never wanted revenge. Not until they tried to erase me first. That night, after I left the living room, I sat in the kitchen in the dark. I reread the hospital bill again and again. The dates, the names, the patient ID. It wasn't just a financial record. It was a map to the moment the lie began. My father wasn't at my birth, because he wasn't supposed to be. And my mother, she hadn't just lied to him. She'd lied to everyone. They built their shame into a story and cast me as the villain. But they forgot something. The quiet ones? We remember everything. And now I had proof, not just of what they did, but who they really were. And if they thought I was done, they were about to learn what a daughter they discarded can do. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was a looping reel of every strange moment from childhood that suddenly made sickening sense. Like the way my mother flinched when a stranger once said I looked nothing like her. Or how my father never spoke about my birth. He told long, winding stories about the day my brothers were born, how he cried when he held them, how the nurse joked that they had his exact nose. But when it came to me, silence. At school, other kids talked about how their moms packed notes in their lunchboxes. Mine packed silence, indifference, a bottle of water, maybe a bruised banana. And when I asked her about it once, she said, "Be grateful I didn't forget." I used to think I was crazy, that I was imagining the distance, that maybe I was too needy, too sensitive, too different. But now, I realized the truth. I wasn't different by nature. I was being pushed out on purpose. The birth records I found in her bag weren't just from a hospital I didn't recognize. They were dated 3 weeks before the date on my official birth certificate. And the father's name listed? Unknown. The lie started the moment I was born. I spent all night researching the hospital. It was in another city, 2 hours away. A small private maternity center, shut down years ago. But digital records still existed. And with a little digging, I found a list of medical staff on call that week. One name jumped out immediately, Dr. Harwood. The same last name as the man I once caught my mother arguing with in a supermarket parking lot when I was 15. She told me it was an old debt collector. I believed her. But my gut had never forgotten that moment. So I followed the thread. And with every click, the knot tightened. Dr. Harwood wasn't just a name. He was a well-respected OB-GYN who practiced in 3 clinics over 25 years. I found a photo. He looked like me. Brown eyes, high cheekbones, same dimple on the right cheek when he smiled. I stared at that photo for a long time. My hand trembled on the mouse. The screen glowed like it was daring me to accept the truth. And I did. I realized, in a single breathless second, why my mother smirked when the DNA results came out. She knew my father wasn't my biological parent. She had known for over 2 decades and said nothing. Instead, she let him carry the bitterness of a child he didn't believe was his. She let me carry the weight of that resentment every day of my life. And when the test came back inconclusive on paternal match, she seized it like a weapon. But here's the twist. It wasn't my father's rage that exposed the truth. It was her arrogance. She'd kept the paperwork like a trophy. She never thought I'd go looking. But I did. And I wasn't done. If they wanted to play with identity, fine. But I would pull every thread. I would follow every clue, find every lie they hid, and bring it into the light. They made me question my place in this family. Now it was their turn to feel like the outsider. Because blood doesn't make a family. But betrayal? That makes enemies. I didn't rush. That's the thing about real revenge. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It waits, sharp and silent, until the perfect moment. I started by ordering a certified copy of my original birth certificate. Not the one my parents gave me, the one they used to enroll me in school. I went through the state health department and requested the record using the hospital name I found, Ridgeview Women's Medical Center. A week later, the envelope arrived. And when I opened it, everything fell into place. Date of birth, April 2nd. Mother, Evelyn Carter. Father, left blank. And there it was again. Attending physician, Dr. Malcolm Harwood. I stared at the document like it was a mirror. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was quiet, focused. I scanned it, saved it, and locked the hard copy in a drawer. Then, I called Dr. Harwood's office. I didn't tell them who I was. I asked if he was still practicing. They told me he'd retired 2 years ago. I asked if they could forward a letter to him. They agreed. That night, I wrote it all down. Dear Dr. Harwood, I believe you were the attending physician at Ridgeview on April 2nd, 1997. I believe my mother is Evelyn Carter. I have reason to believe you knew her. I'm not asking for anything except truth. If you're willing to speak, I'd like to meet. Not for confrontation. Just for closure. Janelle. I mailed the letter. And then I waited. While I waited, I worked on part 2 of the plan. My mother's arrogance had always been her weakness. She flaunted control. Loved being one step ahead. But she'd gotten sloppy, confident that I was still the same quiet girl who swallowed pain instead of fighting back. So I started pulling threads where she couldn't see. First, I contacted a cousin on my father's side, Aunt Lydia's daughter, Tara. She was the only one in the family who'd ever shown me warmth. Asked if she'd ever heard anything strange. She hesitated, then said softly, "There were rumors. Mom said your parents had a rough patch before you were born, that your dad moved out for a while." That was it. That was the crack in the wall. They'd separated. Briefly. And when he came back, my mother was already pregnant. It all made sense. He came back out of guilt, maybe obligation. But doubt always festered underneath. And my mother, rather than admitting what happened, used that doubt as a weapon. She let him simmer in resentment. Let him believe I wasn't his. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. But she fed that bitterness and let it rot into rage. And that rage turned into the life I lived. Years of distance. Coldness. Words like, if only you were a son, stop being dramatic, be more like your brothers. Now I was done hiding. My plan wasn't to scream at them. It was to expose them. Let the family see who they really were. Let their world unravel, not with fire, but with facts. Because people like my mother and father, they don't fear confrontation. They fear truth. And I was about to give it to them. 1 page at a time. Dr. Harwood replied. 2 weeks after I sent the letter, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me I should. "Janelle?" the voice asked, older, steady, cautious. "Yes," I said, my throat suddenly dry. "This is Malcolm Harwood. I got your letter." I sat down slowly. "Thank you for calling." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your mother was a patient. A complicated one." I swallowed hard. "I think I'm her complication." He let out a low sigh, like he'd been waiting years to exhale. I suspected this call might come one day. We met the next weekend at a coffee shop 2 towns over. Neutral ground. He looked like a man who had made peace with his regrets. Soft eyes. Careful words. But when I told him the timeline, my questions, what I'd found, he didn't deny anything. She was desperate. Said she didn't want to raise a child alone. She was angry with your father, but she didn't want a broken home. She left with a lie, and when she came back, she was pregnant. He looked at me sadly. "I thought about reaching out, but I didn't want to disrupt your life. I assumed she'd told the truth by now." "She didn't," I said quietly. He nodded. "I'm sorry." He offered a DNA test. I accepted. He paid for it himself. 2 days later, the results came in. 99.8% match. And just like that, my world shifted again, but this time I was ready. Now I had everything. I didn't go to them. Not yet. Instead, I printed every document. The hospital record. The certified birth certificate. the DNA result from Harwood, and the scanned envelope from the original test, the one my father had waved in my face. Then I mailed it all to one person. My grandmother. My father's mother. The only woman who ever looked at me like I was more than an obligation. She called me 3 hours after the package arrived. "Janelle," she said, her voice trembling. "Come over."
Now.
I did. And I walked into a living room full of people. My aunts, uncles, cousins. Even Tara was there. My grandmother stood with the file in her hands, shaking with fury. "They lied," she said. "To all of us." My parents arrived 30 minutes later. My father entered first, his posture stiff and defensive. My mother followed, arms folded tight, already fuming. "What is this?" he snapped. "Some kind of show?" Grandma didn't yell. She simply held up the paper. "You owe this girl your apology." And then some. My mother tried to speak, but the room turned cold. "You let us treat her like an outsider for 25 years, one uncle said, voice trembling. "You watched us push her away, and you said nothing." My father's voice broke. "I didn't know." "But you thought you did," I interrupted, meeting his eyes. "And you used that doubt like a weapon."
Against me.
"For years." He looked away. And for the first time in my life, my mother was silent. Completely, painfully silent. Because there was nothing left to twist. No story left to spin. The truth was in everyone's hands now. And the room that once let them humiliate me now turned on them. Not with violence. With justice. After the family meeting, things were never the same. My parents didn't say a word to me as they left my grandmother's house that day. No apology. No explanation. Just silence and shame trailing behind them like smoke from a fire they could no longer hide. But I didn't need their words. I had the truth. And now, so did everyone else. The ripple effect was immediate. My father, once the proud man of the house, was met with tight-lipped greetings and cold shoulders at every family gathering. No more stories about his glory days. No more command of the room. He had built his entire identity around loyalty and legacy. And now everyone knew he'd failed on both. As for my mother, her smirk was gone, replaced by a brittle, barely holding it together facade. Her social circle, her book clubs, her charity committees, her brunch groups started to shrink. I didn't need to lift a finger. Whispers did the work. She lied about the child. She manipulated the husband. She let her daughter grow up under resentment to protect her own image. Truth has a way of moving fast when it's been caged for too long. At home, the dynamic shifted too. My brothers, who once parroted our parents' indifference, suddenly looked at me like they were seeing a person for the first time. Tara told me that one of them, Nathan, had come to her in private and said, "I think we messed up. We treated her like nothing, and she was carrying all of this alone." I didn't reply. I wasn't interested in guilt without growth. Meanwhile, my grandmother, bless her, became my fiercest advocate. She invited me to every family dinner, bragged about my work, introduced me to her friends as her strongest granddaughter. She even framed a copy of the DNA result and placed it in her study, not to shame anyone, but to remind herself, as she said, of how powerful truth can be when it finally finds daylight. It wasn't revenge, I felt. Not exactly. It was relief. Like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for years without knowing what it was. But the collapse of their perfect little image didn't stop at reputation. Remember the house I grew up in? The one filled with cold dinners and colder stares? It wasn't even in my father's name. It was inherited from my grandfather, and technically in Grandma's name. She never transferred the deed out of sentimental attachment. But after everything, she changed her will. Tara called me, barely containing her shock. "She's giving you the house." I blinked.
What?
She said she can't, in good faith, leave it to the people who let you suffer under its roof. I didn't ask for it. I never would have. But somehow, the symbolism of it was perfect. The same place where I was cast out like an outsider
Was now mine.
My parents were notified by Grandma's lawyer. They didn't take it well. Apparently, there was screaming. My father tried to argue. My mother threatened to cut off all contact. But here's the thing. You can't threaten someone who's finally free. And I was free. Not just of their lies, but of their grip. And watching their world unravel. Not by force, but by truth. That was a kind of justice no rage could match. After years of being treated like a footnote in my own story, I was finally writing the chapters myself. The house, my house now, was quiet at first. Not empty. Peaceful. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from absence, but from healing. I kept the kitchen window open most mornings just like my grandmother used to. Sunlight would pour in while I brewed coffee, and sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass. Same eyes. Same face. But something was different now. I wasn't flinching anymore. I didn't jump at the sound of raised voices. I didn't walk on eggshells. I didn't shrink to fit into someone else's comfort zone. I took up space. Real space. I started converting the den into a small home office. Bought myself a desk. Painted the walls a soft sage green. On the first shelf, I placed the documents, DNA test, birth records, and hospital bills, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof. You survived this. And not only survived, you rose. With my grandmother's encouragement, I applied to speak at a local women's event. The theme was unspoken truths. I hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't something I ever saw myself doing, but deep down, I knew this story had power. Not for revenge. For reclamation. So I said yes. I stood on a stage in front of a room filled with strangers, and I told them what it felt like to be raised in a home where you were never fully seen. What it felt like to be gaslit by the people who were supposed to love you most. To have your identity treated like an inconvenience. To carry inherited shame that wasn't even yours. I didn't name names. I didn't have to, but I told them this. Sometimes, survival doesn't look like fighting back. Sometimes, it looks like staying quiet, gathering truth, and choosing the perfect moment to rise. You don't owe anyone your silence, especially when they've used it to hurt you. When I stepped off the stage, women I'd never met hugged me with tears in their eyes. You told my story, one whispered. I realized then, this wasn't just about me. This was bigger. So I started a blog, Blood and Truth. Stories like mine. Stories buried under decades of shame, rewritten and reclaimed. And the comments poured in. Women.
Men.
People from all walks of life who had been told they didn't belong in their own families. I wasn't alone. And neither were they. The house became more than a home. It became a space of restoration. A place where cousins would drop by just to sit in the backyard with tea and talk honestly. A place where Grandma would spend Sundays with me, laughing like she'd found something she thought was gone forever. I still passed my parents at family events once in a while. They didn't speak to me. They couldn't meet my eyes. But I didn't need their words anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had truth. And truth had given me wings. I wasn't the embarrassment. I wasn't the outsider. I was the storm they didn't see coming, and the calm that came after. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw my father again, not at a family event or by accident, but because he showed up. I was in the garden, pulling weeds along the fence line, when I heard the crunch of gravel beneath slow, hesitant footsteps. I looked up. He stood at the gate, envelope in hand, eyes older than I remembered. We hadn't spoken since the day everything came out. No texts. No calls. Just the heavy silence that follows an earthquake. Janelle, he said, like the name had weight he was only now learning to carry. I didn't say anything. Just stood and dusted off my hands. He held up the envelope. I didn't come to fight. I came to give this to you. I took it. Inside was a letter. Handwritten.
Tidy.
No smudges. I believed a lie for most of your life. And when I had the chance to choose love over pride, I chose wrong. I see that now. You didn't deserve what we gave you. You didn't deserve silence, or suspicion, or shame. I don't know if I was your father in blood, but I know now I was never your father in spirit. And I will regret that until the day I die. You didn't break this family, Janelle. You survived it. And that makes you stronger than any son I ever could have wanted. I folded the letter carefully. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't ask for forgiveness. And that was the first real respect he'd ever shown me. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter this time. I nodded. Not in forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But in understanding. "Thank you for saying it," I replied, voice calm. He nodded, stepped back, and left. Later that evening, I sat with my grandmother on the porch, the sky bleeding into gold and lavender. She watched me, with the kind of pride that doesn't need words. "You know what I love most about you," she said, sipping her tea. "You never tried to destroy them. You just showed them the mirror." I smiled. Sometimes the mirror is punishment enough. We both laughed softly, because it was true. I could have exposed them to the world, shamed them publicly. But instead, I let the truth do the work. The quiet, patient, undeniable truth. And that truth had already rewritten my legacy. No longer the daughter who didn't belong. I was the one who uncovered the lie. The one who rebuilt something honest from the ashes. The one who didn't need to carry their shame a second longer. That night, I stood in the hallway of the house I once felt so small in, now fully mine. I placed the original DNA envelope and the letter from my father side by side in a shadow box. Not to dwell, but to remember. To honor the girl I was, the one who stood silent for years. And the woman I became, the one who spoke when it mattered most. They had tried to define me by absence. But I became powerful through presence. And the most poetic justice of all? They gave me nothing. Yet I walked away with everything that mattered. My name. My peace. My truth.